year is 200,000 BCE. Somewhere in Africa, a new kind of being takes its first steps into history. They look much like us, but their world could not be more different. Armed with nothing but sharp stones, fire, and each other, they braved predators larger than trucks and ice age winters that turned whole continents into frozen deserts. Who were these people? The first humans. How did they endure in a world where one mistake meant extinction? What gave them the edge over rivals like the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, who walked the earth beside them but did not survive? And perhaps most mysterious of all, why in the midst of this brutal struggle did they stop to paint animals on cave walls, carve tiny figurines, and bury their dead with care? This is the story of the first humans, a story of tools, of migration, of community, of art, and of the questions that still echo in us today. What was life really like in the Stone Age? And what does it reveal about who we are? The dawn of our species. These first humans are the beginning of our story, the origin of every culture, every language, every civilization to come. They emerged in Africa roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, descended from earlier hominins who had walked the earth for millions of years. But they were not alone. In Europe, the Neanderthals flourished, powerful, stocky hunters, well adapted to the Ice Age cold. In Asia, the Denisovans left their mysterious traces in DNA. And in scattered corners of the world, even older humans like Homo erectus still clung to existence. Yet from all these lineages, it would be Homo sapiens who endured, spread, and reshaped the planet. The period in which they lived is known as the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age. For tens of thousands of years, this was a world without farms, without cities, without written words. Life was lived as hunters and gatherers, in small bands that roamed the land in search of food and shelter. But their lives were not only about survival. They invented, they imagined, they formed bonds that held their groups together. They asked questions about the world around them and left behind art that still speaks to us across the ages. So what set these first humans apart from the rest? How did they manage to outthink and outlast their rivals? And beyond food and fire, what did they value most? In this journey, we'll explore the answers. We'll see how they built their tools and weapons. We'll follow them on the hunt and through their daily lives. We'll step inside their tribes to understand the bonds of cooperation that kept them alive. And we'll enter the painted caves and sacred places where the birth of human imagination first took form. The innovators, tools, and technology. Survival in the Stone Age was never guaranteed. Predators lurked in the tall grasses, storms swept across the plains, and hunger was a constant shadow. But what set Homo sapiens apart from every other creature was not claws or strength. It was the mind. More than any weapon of nature, their greatest advantage was the ability to innovate. For early humans, tools were not a luxury. They were the very edge between life and death. Yet the tools of Homo sapiens carried a spark of ingenuity that surpassed those of their ancestors. Earlier humans, like Homo erectus, had long used simple hand axes. Large stones chipped to a point, heavy and effective, but limited in their design. These hand axes could cut meat, split wood, or crack bones, but they had barely changed for hundreds of thousands of years. The first Homo sapiens took toolmaking further. They discovered new ways of striking stone cores to produce long, thin blades instead of clumsy chunks. A single block of flint could now yield dozens of razor-sharp flakes. Each flake could be reworked into knives, scrapers, spear points, or drills. Suddenly, stone was no longer just a blunt instrument. It became a toolkit, flexible and specialized. This innovation reveals something vital about their minds. To make a blade, one had to imagine the shape hidden inside the stone before striking. It was an act of planning, foresight, and imagination. These weren't just rocks chipped by accident. They were visions of tools waiting to be revealed. But stone was only the beginning. Bone, antler, and ivory became new raw materials. Carved harpoons allowed humans to fish rivers and seas with precision. Bone awls pierced hides for sewing, while needles, fine, polished, delicate, transformed scraps of fur into fitted clothing. In cold climates, this was no small thing. A stitched coat or a pair of boots could mean the difference between survival and death. Wood, too, became a weapon in human hands. Spears hardened in fire carried hunters closer to their prey. Later, a brilliant invention extended the reach of the arm itself. The spear thrower, or atlatl, with a simple carved lever, a hunter could hurl a spear twice as far, twice as fast. Suddenly, distance became safety. Prey that once demanded risky, up-close attacks could now be felled from a secure range. This was more than a tool. It was a revolution in hunting. And still, the innovations continued. Some groups crafted early bows, bending wood and stringing sinew to send arrows silently through the air. Others shaped nets from fibers, trapping fish or small game. In every landscape, in every challenge, humans found new answers. These inventions did not emerge in isolation. Each discovery built upon the last, shared within tribes, taught to children, refined over generations. In this way, knowledge itself became humanity's most powerful tool. A stone blade was useful, but the idea of the blade, passed from one mind to another, was priceless. Even more striking is what these tools tell us about human imagination. They required the ability to see beyond the present moment. To carve a needle, one had to imagine the garment it might stitch. To shape a spear tip, one had to picture the hunt it would one day strike. This was thinking in futures, not just in moments. It is here that we begin to see what separated Homo sapiens from their rivals. Neanderthals, for example, were strong and resourceful. They crafted effective stone tools and hunted large animals with remarkable skill. But their toolkits changed little over thousands of years. Their methods were consistent, reliable, but static. Homo sapiens, by contrast, were restless innovators. Their tools evolved rapidly, spreading across regions with startling speed. A new technique discovered in Africa might soon appear in the Middle East, then in Europe. Wherever they traveled, they adapted, improved, and shared. This restless creativity gave them an edge, not just over the animals they hunted, but over the other human species they encountered. The importance of these innovations cannot be overstated. With harpoons, humans mastered rivers and seas. With needles, they conquered the cold. With spear throwers, they turned fragile bodies into apex predators. Each tool expanded the boundaries of where humans could live and what they could achieve. But technology was more than survival. It was also identity. A flint blade or an ivory needle was not just an object. It was a symbol of knowledge, of skill, of belonging to the human story. Every chipped stone, every carved bone, every sharpened spear was a testament to the mind that made it. When we look back at these tools today, lying silent in the dust of ancient campsites, we see more than artifacts. We see imagination made real. We see the moment humanity learned to bend nature to its will, to transform raw matter into possibility. And it was this, more than strength, more than numbers, that gave Homo sapiens the power to spread across the globe. The tools they carried were more than weapons. They were the keys that unlocked the world. But tools alone did not ensure survival. A sharpened spear meant nothing without food to hunt. A bone needle meant nothing without warmth to fight the cold. To truly endure, the first humans had to master not only invention, but adaptation. How did they build shelter in an unforgiving ice age? What did they eat in landscapes that shifted with every season? And how did these choices carry them on the greatest journey of all, the migration out of Africa and into the unknown? To answer that, we step into their camps, their diets, and their restless journeys across the earth. The migrators, shelter and sustenance. Armed with their new tools, the first humans began to push beyond the familiar landscapes of Africa. Step by step, generation by generation, they set out on one of the greatest journeys in history, the migration that would eventually carry them across the globe. The first humans who walked out of Africa carried with them a dark skin, an adaptation forged under the fierce sun of the equator. This pigmentation protected their bodies from the harsh ultraviolet rays, guarding their health and survival. As they spread into new lands with weaker sunlight, their descendants slowly changed. Over thousands of generations, lighter skin evolved, helping them absorb more vitamin D in places where the sun was scarce. The diversity of human appearance we see today is not a story of separate origins, but of one shared journey, shaped by the landscapes and climates our ancestors called home. At first, these movements may have been small, a band following a river northward, a family chasing herds across the grasslands. But over time, these small steps became vast odysseys. By 90,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had reached the Middle East. From there, they spread east into Asia, south toward Australia, north into Europe, and much later across the land bridge into the Americas. Every new land brought new challenges. Some walked into deserts where water was scarce. Others faced frozen tundras where temperatures plunged far below freezing. Still others adapted to lush forests alive with dangers of their own. Venomous snakes, big cats, insects carrying disease. To survive in each environment required not just courage, but remarkable flexibility. Contrary to the popular image of the caveman, most humans did not live in caves. Yes, caves were used, especially in Europe, where Ice Age winters could be brutal. But more often, shelters were built from whatever the landscape provided. In Mammoth Country, bones and tusks became the frames for huts, covered with animal hides to trap heat. In forests, branches were lashed into domes and roofs of grass and bark. On the coasts, driftwood and reeds formed temporary shelters, light enough to be moved when the tribe moved on. These homes were not permanent. They were designed for mobility. For people who followed the herds in the seasons, a shelter was a place to rest, cook, and recover before moving again. Survival depended on this rhythm. To stay too long in one place was to risk exhausting the resources around it. Food, of course, was the center of this rhythm. The diet of the first humans was astonishingly varied. Large animals like mammoths, bison, aurochs, and wild horses provided meat, fat, hides, and bones. But hunts were dangerous and not always successful. To balance the risk, they turned to smaller prey: rabbits, birds, turtles, and fish. Along rivers and coasts, shellfish and crabs became staples, packed with protein and easy to collect. Foraging was just as vital as hunting. Plants, fruits, nuts, and roots provided steady calories and vitamins. Wild grains could be gathered and ground into coarse flour. Honey, when it could be found, offered rare sweetness. Knowledge of plants was an inherited wisdom, passed down through generations. Which roots could heal a wound, which leaves could cure a fever, which berries were poison. To know the land was to survive it. The hunt itself was a drama of cooperation and danger. A mammoth could feed a band for weeks, but bringing one down required careful planning. Hunters tracked herds for days, reading signs in broken branches and fresh tracks. They worked together to drive animals into traps, over cliffs, or into bogs where spears could strike safely. Even smaller hunts demanded teamwork. One group flushed the prey, another waited in ambush. Every role mattered, and yet hunger was always near. One failed hunt, one harsh winter, one drought could push a group to the edge. It is no wonder that humans became nomadic, moving restlessly to follow the shifting abundance of the world. Movement was survival. But what's remarkable is how quickly humans adapted to new environments. In colder climates, they mastered clothing stitched from hides. In forests, they shaped bows and arrows for quick, silent hunting. On the coasts, they built rafts or simple boats to fish deeper waters. In each new place, they learned not only to survive, but to thrive. Their migrations were not a march of conquest, but a story of adaptation. Wherever they went, they learned. And with every new land they entered, the human story expanded. Still, survival was never just about tools, shelters, or food. A spear meant nothing if hunters did not work together. A fire meant little if the knowledge of how to make it wasn't shared. Even the most ingenious shelter could not protect against isolation. The truth of survival was this: humans needed each other. It was the tribe, the small, close-knit community, that carried them through the Ice Age, across deserts and into forests. Cooperation was not optional. It was the foundation of everything. So while tools and adaptation carried them far, it was community that kept them alive. And this raises the next great question: how did these early tribes function? What roles did people play? How did they care for their sick, their children, their elders? And how did they forge bonds strong enough to endure a world filled with danger? To answer that, we must step inside the tribe, into the circle of firelight, where cooperation and compassion became humanity's greatest strength. The tribe, community, and cooperation. Out in the wilds of the Stone Age, no human could stand alone for long. Strength came not from the individual, but from the group, the tribe. A typical band of hunter-gatherers was small, usually between 20 and 50 people. Big enough to share the burdens of survival, but small enough to stay mobile, to pack up and move when the land could no longer sustain them. In these groups, everyone mattered. Food was not a private possession, it was shared. A successful hunt meant meat for all, not just for the hunter who struck the final blow. Gathered plants were divided among the camp, not hidden away. This was not charity, it was necessity. For if one person went hungry, the weakness of the few could endanger the many. Cooperation was survival. Roles within the tribe likely shifted with age, skill, and need. The strong and agile often led the hunt, but it was the sharp-eyed trackers who could read the faintest footprint in the mud. Gatherers with deep plant knowledge knew which roots to dig and which berries to avoid. Elders, though no longer swift enough to chase game, carried something even more precious: memory. They remembered the seasons, the migrations of herds, the places where water could always be found. Archaeological evidence shows us something even more profound: care. Skeletons have been found of individuals who lived for years with crippling injuries, people who could not have hunted or gathered for themselves. Yet they survived. Someone fed them. Someone protected them. This was compassion, empathy, qualities that made the tribe more than a collection of individuals. It made them human. Language tied the tribe together in ways no other species could match. We will never know the exact words spoken, but we know the power of speech was there. With language, hunters could coordinate an ambush. Parents could warn children of danger. Elders could pass on lessons, stories, and wisdom. And around the fire, when the day's struggles were over, those words became something more: stories, myths, tales of the hunt, retold with laughter and pride, lessons of survival, wrapped in parables, memories of ancestors carried forward into the future. Storytelling was more than entertainment. It was education. It was culture. A child learned not only how to throw a spear, but why courage mattered. A youth learned not only which plant healed a wound, but why generosity bound the group together. Stories preserved knowledge, shaped values, and gave meaning to hardship. Some anthropologists suggest that storytelling may have been as vital as fire itself. Fire gave warmth and light. Stories gave identity and hope. Together, they transformed survival into something richer, into life. Conflict, of course, must have existed. Disagreements over food, jealousy, or leadership would have tested these fragile groups. But the price of division was high, and cooperation always had to win. Groups that fractured too often or failed to support their weakest simply would not endure. The tribe was not just a survival unit. It was the first school, the first government, the first safety net. It was where children learned, where adults worked, and where the old remembered. It was the circle of protection in a dangerous world. And in that circle, something remarkable began to take shape. Humans were not just surviving together, they were beginning to believe together. They saw meaning in the hunt, in the animals, in the cycle of life and death. They began to express that meaning through ritual, through symbols, through acts that pointed beyond the material world. It was here in the heart of the tribe that imagination turned into culture. So how did these beliefs take form? Why did they paint on cave walls, carve figurines, and bury their dead with care? And what do these acts reveal about the inner lives of the first humans? To answer that, we must step into the darkness of the caves, where flickering firelight reveals the birth of art, ritual, and the human soul. The artists: art, ritual, and belief. Survival was only part of the human story. If food and shelter kept the body alive, it was imagination that nourished the spirit. Somewhere deep in the Paleolithic, our ancestors began to create symbols, to seek meaning, to make art. And in those acts, they revealed a new truth about what it means to be human. Across Europe, in the dark recesses of caves, their visions remain. In Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira. The walls come alive with painted horses, bison, aurochs, mammoths, lions. Animals rendered with astonishing detail and motion, their bodies outlined in ochre, their forms filled with charcoal and manganese. Some paintings are more than 30,000 years old, yet they still pulse with life. Why paint in caves? These were not convenient canvases. Many chambers lie hundreds of meters deep, accessible only by crawling through narrow passages. Artists carried torches or stone lamps filled with animal fat, grinding pigments from minerals and mixing them with spit or fat to make paint. To choose such places was an act of intention, of ceremony. Scholars have long debated their purpose. Some see hunting magic, rituals to ensure a successful kill. Others believe they were teaching tools, ways to show the young what animals look like, how they moved. Still others argue they were spiritual, attempts to connect with forces unseen, to honor the animals that gave them life. Whatever the reason, one truth is clear. These were not random doodles. They were symbols, and symbols are the gateway to imagination, to belief, to culture. But caves were not the only canvas. Small figurines appear across Paleolithic sites, some of the most famous being the so-called Venus figurines. Carved from stone, bone, or ivory, they show women with exaggerated features, large hips, heavy breasts, rounded forms. Were they fertility icons linked to survival and reproduction? Were they symbols of motherhood or of a goddess? Or were they simple self-representations, the earliest portraits carved by human hands? The truth is lost to time, but their very existence tells us something vital. Humans were thinking beyond survival. They were shaping identity, representation, and meaning. Jewelry, too, reveals this longing for expression. Beads carved from shells, pendants made from teeth, ornaments shaped from bone. Some were worn, some buried with the dead. They were more than decoration. They were statements of belonging, of memory, perhaps even of status. A necklace of shells carried hundreds of miles inland was proof not just of beauty, but of connection, of networks of trade or exchange between groups. And then there is the question of death. Archaeologists have uncovered graves where the dead were not discarded, but carefully laid to rest. Some were sprinkled with red ochre, symbolic as blood or life force. Others were buried with tools, ornaments, or even food. These were rituals, deliberate acts of care. They tell us that the first humans felt grief, that they honored their dead, and perhaps believed in something beyond life. What we see in all these acts, the paintings, the carvings, the burials, is the dawn of belief. Belief in forces larger than themselves. Belief in memory, in ancestors, in spirits, in meaning beyond the visible. This was humanity's spiritual awakening. It transformed survival into culture, struggle into story, death into ritual. It was here that humans became not just tool makers or hunters, but artists, dreamers, and believers. Imagine a night deep in the Ice Age. A tribe gathers in a cave, fire flickering on the walls. The elder mixes pigments and with steady hands begins to paint a bison on the stone. The children watch, wide-eyed, as the animal takes shape in the glowing light. Perhaps a hunter whispers a story of the bison's strength, of the chase, of respect owed to the beast that gives its flesh. In that moment, survival and imagination merge into something greater. Or imagine a burial. A young woman lies still, her body sprinkled with ochre, a necklace of shells at her throat. Around her the tribe mourns. They do not see only death, they see continuity, memory, perhaps even hope. They believe that her spirit matters, that she is more than her body. These scenes remind us that the first humans were not just surviving, they were asking questions we still ask today. Why are we here? What comes after death? What connects us to the world around us? The answer was not found in tools, but in symbols. And once humans began to think symbolically, the world changed forever. The art, rituals, and beliefs of the Stone Age reveal something profound. Humanity was beginning to see itself as part of a larger story. Not just individuals, not just tribes, but participants in a universe filled with meaning. This is why the Paleolithic was not just the age of hunters and gatherers. It was the age of the first artists, the first dreamers, the first believers. But this age, remarkable as it was, would not last forever. For tens of thousands of years, humanity lived as nomads, wandering, painting, burying, and believing. And then a great shift began. Seeds were planted, animals were tamed, villages grew where camps once stood. It was the dawn of agriculture, and with it, the end of the hunter-gatherer world. So how did this transformation happen? What was gained and what was lost when humans traded the freedom of the nomadic life for the stability of farming? To answer that, we must turn to the final chapter of the Stone Age and the legacy it left behind. The legacy, the end of the era. For tens of thousands of years, humanity's story was one of movement. Bands of hunter-gatherers roamed the plains, followed herds, and adapted to shifting landscapes. It was the only way of life we had ever known. But around 12,000 years ago, in several corners of the world, something began to change. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, people who had once foraged for wild grains began to plant them intentionally. Seeds that were scattered in the earth one season could be harvested the next. The gamble of the hunt was replaced by the promise of the harvest. At the same time, animals were no longer just prey. Goats, sheep, and cattle were tamed, bred, and cared for. They provided milk, wool, and meat, resources that could be relied upon year after year. This was the agricultural revolution, and with it, the Stone Age as humanity had known it for hundreds of millennia came to an end. Farming changed everything. No longer did groups need to wander endlessly in search of food. They could settle in one place. Villages grew where camps had once stood. Food surpluses meant larger populations could survive together. And with more people came new complexity: leaders, laborers, specialists. But the change was not without its costs. For millennia, hunter-gatherers had lived on diverse diets, drawn from dozens of plants and animals. Early farmers often narrowed their diet to one or two staple crops: wheat, barley, rice, or maize. Health declined. Skeletons from the Neolithic often show signs of malnutrition, disease, and shorter stature compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. And where small, mobile bands had once avoided widespread illness, settled communities created new risks. Living close together with animals brought new diseases, infections that would spread rapidly, some of which still haunt us today. Agriculture also reshaped human society. Where hunter-gatherers had shared food and lived in relatively equal groups, farming created hierarchies. Some controlled the surplus, others labored in the fields. Wealth and power became uneven, and inequality began to take root. Yet farming also unlocked new possibilities. Surpluses freed some people to become builders, artisans, priests, or rulers. Villages grew into towns, and towns into cities, writing, law, monuments, and empires. All of these were built on the foundation agriculture provided. In time, the old ways began to fade. The great age of hunters and gatherers gave way to the age of farmers and kings. But not everywhere, and not entirely. Even as fields spread across fertile valleys, some groups resisted the shift. In deserts, forests, and tundras, where farming was difficult, hunter-gatherers endured. And even today, in a few remote places, small bands still live as their ancestors did, moving with the seasons, living lightly on the land. Their lives remind us of a truth: the Stone Age never truly disappeared. It remains with us not only in a few surviving traditions, but in our very bodies and minds. The drive to share, to cooperate, to imagine, and to create, these are legacies of the hunter-gatherer age. It was during the Stone Age that we became human. We learned to innovate, to adapt, to build communities, and to believe in something larger than ourselves. Agriculture may have changed the world, but it was the hunter-gatherers who gave us the tools, both literal and cultural, that made civilization possible. And so, as the Stone Age ended, a new era began. But the echoes of that ancient world remain in all of us. So what can we learn from their story? What does their legacy reveal about who we are today and who we might become tomorrow? To answer that, we turn to the conclusion of our journey and the final reflection on the first humans. Conclusion. The story of the first humans is not just a distant chapter of history, It is our story, the beginning of everything we are. From their first steps on the savannas of Africa to their long migrations across deserts, mountains, and frozen tundras, our ancestors endured with little more than stone, fire, and each other. They built shelters that held back the cold, fashioned weapons that leveled the odds against mighty beasts, and shared food that kept their communities alive. But they did more than survive. They dreamed. They painted visions on cave walls, carved figures of mystery and beauty, buried their dead with care, and told stories by firelight. They lived in a world filled with danger, but also with meaning. A world where every hunt, every ritual, every story became part of the human journey. These were not primitive beings stumbling blindly through life. They were innovators, artists, believers, and storytellers. They were us. When we hold a stone blade in our hands today, we are touching the imagination of someone who lived 30,000 years ago. When we look at a handprint in a cave, we see a direct message across time. I was here. I lived. I mattered. The legacy of the Stone Age endures in us all, in our creativity, in our compassion, in our need to connect and to wonder. The tools have changed, the landscapes have shifted, but the essence remains. We are still the children of hunter-gatherers, still the descendants of dreamers who first asked what it means to be human. So the next time you light a fire, or tell a story, or create something new, remember you are echoing the very first humans. Their journey lives on, in every heartbeat, in every idea, in every step we take into the future. This was what life was really like in the Stone Age, and it is why their story is not just history, it is our story too. If you've enjoyed this journey into our deep past, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what ancient mystery you'd like us to explore next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again as we follow the echoes of time.